Hey, y'all, welcome to Eat, Stay, Life. So, let's get into the finer things. So, I had an absolutely fantastic trip just recently. Without going into too many of the details, I got to go be in Washington, D.C., which is something that I do frequently. And while I was there, because we've started the new podcast, and because Eat, Stay, Life is focused on good food, good restaurants, good whiskeys, good cigars. Um, since 2011, there's been an establishment in Washington, D.C. in the what's called the NoMa area, NOMA, which is north of Massachusetts, which is just a street in the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. And there's this place there that's been there since 2011 called Jack Rose Dining Saloon. Now, because I've been doing research and I've been digging more into whiskeys and bourbons and ryes outside of scotches, because scotches have been my jam for a while now, the more I get into American whiskeys and Japanese whiskeys, international whiskeys, I went out and I joined online a website called Whiskey Advocate. Now, Whiskey Advocate is one of the preeminent whiskey publications that is out there for whiskey aficionados. It's kind of like Cigar Aficionado, where it's like, if you love cigars, you go get a subscription to Cigar Aficionado. Well, if you love whiskeys, a great place to go to get a good grasp of upcoming whiskeys, ones that are out there, and just the whiskey world in general is Whiskey Advocate. Well, my wife found an issue of Whiskey Advocate from 2018 that was touting their top 20 picks. And I got it because it was the top 20 best whiskeys in the world that year, pre-COVID. And I didn't think anything of it. And it just, I'm dying now because it's Whiskey Advocate, and I have a subscription to Whiskey Advocate. And I just kind of laughed because I was like, even way back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, there is the fact that they were there in the back of my mind, and I always had a kind of a thing for whiskey. So what happened there was, in that issue, they talked about fantastic dining establishments for whiskey. And then I went online and started doing some research on great whiskey bars around the United States, and one kept coming to the top of the list every single time, and it's this place that is not a bar. It's a restaurant / bar / saloon, and it's the Jack Rose Dining Saloon in Washington, D.C., in NoMa, which is just a neighborhood in D.C. So what did we do? We were up there doing our thing in Washington, D.C., and talked to the wife, and so we went to the Jack Rose Dining Saloon. Now, I've never been there, so I had high hopes. They have been around since 2011. The owner, Bill Thomas, he curates the largest selection of whiskeys, both domestic, i.e. American whiskeys, to international whiskeys, to include whiskeys spelled with a Y, not an EY, which won't say that's right or wrong. I'll just simply say that whiskey spelled with a Y is how it was spelled before whiskey was even spelled by anyone else. And so they maintain an open to the public bottles, over 2,700 different types and varieties of whiskeys that you can buy. That doesn't include the other things that they have on there, like brandies and things of that nature. So they have the largest selection of whiskeys for tasting in the Western Hemisphere, which means they have the largest publicly available for tasting selection of whiskeys in the United States, with over 2,700 plus bottles of whiskey available for tasting at any one time. And it just blew my mind. So on top of that, they've been open since 2011. I feel like I'm a little remiss over the fact that I didn't even really know they existed until just about a month ago, which really is my fault, not their fault, because they've been all over the place. I just hadn't been paying attention. And so we went to the Jack Rose Dining Saloon in Washington, D.C. And we pull up in the Uber because I'm gonna have a few drinks, and the wife didn't want to drive in Washington, D.C. So pull up in the Uber, which remember to drink responsibly. That's right. Remember, drink responsibly. If you're gonna drink, don't drive. Maybe do the watermelon crawl. I'm sorry. I'm having a moment. I'm sorry. That really cheesy. Sorry, dad joke stuff. And for those of us who go back into the 90s, you remember that if you drink, don't drive. Do the watermelon crawl. Have fun, y'all. Anyway, yeah, probably get hit on YouTube for even singing that. Anyway, but outside of that, so you walk up to the bar and you walk up to the restaurant, and it's just this kind of it's in a historic district. There are other historic buildings, you know, 2 to 3 level brick buildings that are there. And you get out of the Uber, help the wife out of the Uber, and we walk up to this glass door and a beautiful kind of saloon glass wall, looking out onto the street. And we walk in, and we were immediately greeted by a really, really phenomenally nice gal at the front desk. Her name's Corey. And she checked, saw our reservations, and she said, "Oh, this is your first time here, so let's get you in a booth." And they seated us in one of these plush booths that faces directly out onto the floor of the restaurant and the bar. And this is the thing that absolutely blew my mind. Where do you put 2,700 plus bottles of whiskey? Well, I'll tell you, Jack Rose has figured that out. It is a whiskey library. And that's the only way that I can think to call this. So think of the old, wood paneled libraries that you see in things like in old, English manors, or in historical buildings where they have the wood panels with the wood shelves and the wood lining all built into the walls, and they've got ladders going up the wall, and as the ladder goes up the wall, you'll see people scaling that ladder and going back and forth, grabbing things off the shelf like they were books being asked to be looked at by a reader. And it was amazing because you had floor to ceiling bottles of whiskey. And not only that, but it was all 4 walls had whiskey on them. You were surrounded by whiskey bottles from the moment you walk in to the moment you walk out. Your entire dinner in the main dining saloon with the bar and everything else. And as you're seated there, you're going to be surrounded by whiskey. You're enveloped by whiskey. There's no other way to say it, but Bill Thomas and the folks that are there at the Jack Rose Dining Saloon, not only do they have a passion for whiskey, they have a love of whiskey. And that love pours out into the atmosphere. You've got this conversations constantly going on everywhere. So there's this light hum of conversation everywhere you go. There's not a bunch of music overpowering anything. And as everybody's talking and the clink of the glasses and the dining and the bottles moving and people pouring, we're approached by our server. His name was Brian. Brian is also one of their whiskey experts. And I can tell you this much, they keep a whiskey expert on staff at all times. So that way, when you come in, if you're new to whiskey or if you've been doing whiskey for a long time, you can ask their expert and they will go find you different expressions of whiskey that fall into what your palate is and what you're looking to experience. The questions you may have of whiskey, they're there to help answer and there to help you dive deeper into the question and maybe not even give you an answer, but let you discover your own answers through that. So one of the things that I found absolutely stunning was when you walk in, the lighting. They've got this down. It feels like you've stepped back in time into a pre or just post-Prohibition-era bar or saloon. You're transported back in time into the 1920s and the 1930s. The servers are all wearing jeans and some have suspenders on and just a black shirt, and they're doing what they do best. And you just see the bustle of a busy restaurant and bar that does nothing but whiskey. And I'll tell you, that put my heart alight and brought a smile to my face. One second as I take a little tug on my redemption rye. That's just good. And so what you've got is you've got this Prohibition era type vibe and feel. You've got the wood paneling and the woods surrounding you with the bottles of whiskey from floor to ceiling and behind your head. And you're just enveloped in this atmosphere that feels like you've been transported back in time from the lighting, which is like Edison bulb type lighting, to, and it's this soft, warm glow of that Edison bulb, or almost like gas lights that you would see, or gas lamps that you would see back in the day in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning decor, interior, just vibe and feel is you're transported, which is what you want when you go into a place like this. You want to be transported into a time, into an era that, like a bygone era where whiskey was king and there were powers pushing against it to try to cleanse the United States of all the evils of alcohol. And the roaring 20s was underway, and you had flappers and robber barons, and Washington, D.C., the seat of power of the nation, one of the wealthiest, most successful up-and-coming nations, had just won a world war and were living the dream. And part of that dream was lifting a glass, nodding to your buddy or nodding to your loved ones, and taking a pull on an American whiskey or American bourbon. And Jack Rose Dining Saloon clearly, completely, and successfully draws you right back into that era. And so let's fast forward, okay? So now I've set the scene, all right? We are in Jack Rose Saloon. We're in Prohibition, pre-Prohibition era. But of course, I've got questions because, hey, I do a YouTube channel, and also I love whiskey and I want to know things. So Brian gets over there and he's our server, and we're talking, going back and forth. And I told him, I said, I'm a Scotch guy by trade. I drink Scotches. I love a Scotch. Scotch, nothing like a good Scotch. I'm just saying. It's going to be huge. And so he goes, well, and I said, I also am a big old-fashioned fan. And he goes, then you have to try our signature old-fashioned. And so that's exactly what I did. So talked to the wife, and what we did was it's a Southern flair on the food that they do. I'm not going to say it's Southern comfort food. It's a Southern flair on the food that they do. They definitely reach deep into the whiskeys, bourbons. Virginia is right across the Potomac River, which is the start of the South. And that history, you feel like they're just embracing and lovingly pulling you into the history of Washington, D.C., Prohibition, the seat of power of a nation. And I ordered up the signature old-fashioned. I ordered up also the jalapeno deviled eggs. I'm not going to give you a list of what's in them just because it's deviled eggs with jalapenos laid on top. But they're using a fresh pickled jalapeno, which, if that's possible, because I know it's pickled, so it's not fresh, but it was crisp and fresh and pickled jalapeno on top of this deviled egg. And when you take that bite, it explodes with a burst of flavor in your mouth. It's just, you're greeted with all those umami, wonderful, salty umami type flavors that you get when you think of eating potato salad at a picnic, or a deviled egg at a picnic, the one that your mom used to make, or the one that your auntie used to make when you'd go to do picnics and barbecues with the family or the church. And so but the great part is you got that pickled, crisp jalapeno on top, so you get all of that, "Oh, it's a deviled egg, it's that comfort food, it's that, oh, this is fantastic," and then all of a sudden you get that cut of that pickled jalapeno and that crispness, and as you bite into it and you chew it down, then the heat, that trickle of heat just kinda starts building up in your mouth, and it kinda, like, visits the back of your throat, which works perfectly well when you've got their signature old fashioned. Now, their signature old fashioned is made with Wild Turkey 101 rye, and again, I screw this word up all the time. Last video, I called it Demerara syrup, and I know I didn't say that correctly, but Demerara syrup, and they're in-house bitters. So they make their own bitters, which means that this is only unique and only to the Jack Rose Dining Saloon. And so I had their signature old fashioned. So here this heat's building up. You get 4 deviled eggs. I ate 2, the wife ate 2 because don't steal food from the spouse because she might, stab you in the hand with a fork. I'm just saying. Anyway, and so with that, as I'm eating into this, I feel that heat starting to build up from that jalapeno. It starts to chase. It starts to be like, ooh, okay, that's it's not hot, but it's not comfortable. If that makes any sense to those who like to eat hot and spicy foods, I think you'll get what I'm talking about. Where it's got that tingle and it's starting to move up on the tongue and the back of the throat, where it's starting to feel like you're building up a flame in there, but not hot enough to actually hurt, but hot enough to get your attention. And so that's when I picked up the old fashioned, swirled it around in that wonderful, beautiful ice cube they've got in there, and I kicked it back a little bit. Let it roll on the tongue. Let that beautiful Wild Turkey 101 rye caress my tongue, caress my palate, get all over and coat the inside of my mouth and go down the back of my throat. And just like that, the heat was a trickle. It was still there. I knew it was there, but it didn't move into any discomfort. So we finished our appetizer, and as we're drinking the old fashioned, we're finishing the appetizer. Brian came back over. He took our order, and in the process of taking our order, the wife decided to get the Rohan Duck Duo. Now, when I read Rohan, I know it's something special about the duck, and forgive me for being uneducated in this aspect, and someday I will figure out why Rohan duck is an important thing, but I can tell you this much. Really good duck. Because when they said Rohan Duck Duo, and I was reading it, I was expecting something from Lord of the Rings, because for me, when I hear Rohan, I think the riders of Rohan coming down the side to Helm's Deep to protect with Gandalf to save the host that are defending against the Uruk-hai. But there's my geek in me, so forgive me. But the Rohan Duck Duo, which was absolutely brilliant, but we'll get to that. And then also ordered the American Wagyu Culotte steak. And as I was getting towards the bottom of the old fashioned, Brian asked if I'd like to do a whiskey flight. And I said, okay, so what do y'all got in here? And he asked me what I liked, and just exactly what you would hope. I started describing the kinds of scotches that I like to drink, the kind of whiskeys with a Y that I like to drink, because that's my go-to. American whiskeys and bourbons, because they have a high corn mash bill most of the time, I'm finding I struggle with those just because they seem a little too sweet for my palate. But he recommended going with a bourbon, going with a rye, and he didn't just recommend a bourbon or a rye. One thing that you're going to get treated to if you go to Jack Rose and you do their flight is make sure you get the premier drams. The premier drams, their bourbon, their rye, are Jack Rose DC premier drams and bourbons, single barrel. These are bottles only done for Jack Rose. Bill Thomas and his team have gone and selected barrels from a Kentucky distillery, which they did not name, which I respect. I understand. It's because, it's the Jack Rose. But they have selected specific barrels, and they are aging those barrels, and every few years they come out. Now, if I remember correctly, the expression on this one for this expression was at 7 years. So this is a 7-year aged barrel. And I got the bourbon and I got the rye, which are both single barrels. Holy moly, brother and sisters. I will tell you, I have tasted good scotches. I've tasted some good bourbons and some good ryes. In fact, I'm a big fan of ryes when it comes to the old fashions. I think they go fantastic in an old fashioned. They add a spiciness to the old fashioned. It smooths it out. I don't know. It's just my own personal preference. Like this, I have a redemption rye in front of me, and I'm loving taking that. So, but their premier drams. If you're a whiskey lover, if you love to go experience new things, if you want to go to a place where you can sit down and you can have a dram of whiskey, EY, that you are not going to find anywhere else, truly a craft distillery type whiskey, then make sure you go to Jack Rose Dining Saloon and you ask for the premier dram flight, because I did the water droplets. That was it, just like I've done with my Redemption Rye, just a couple water drops in there just to open it up and let it work. I got into the bourbon. Again, like I said, I don't like the high corn mash bill. That's not really my vibe. And I know that at least 51% of that is a corn mash bill. Well, turn around and it was smooth and soft. Once you opened it up, it was so smooth and soft and beautiful on the palate and warm and buttery. And it had this wonderful, like, caramel toffee, easy sugar cookie almost type feel to it. It was very much dessert forward type feel to it. And being a Scotch guy, our server, Brian, who's also one of the whiskey connoisseur guys there, one of the whiskey experts, he said, you really got to try the rye. And that's what I did. And when I got into the rye, oh my goodness, y'all. That was a ride of a lifetime, because I had the rye, and as it opened up more underneath after those couple water droplets, it became this wonderful, warm, soft blanket in my mouth that just lovingly caressed my taste buds. I got the toffees and the caramels and the spiced back note of the rye, and this almost like cinnamon with just a hint of vanilla in there. It was almost like having like a craft hot chocolate, wonderful, amazing rye that just gave up and made love to my tongue and my taste buds. So much so that I bought a full bottle of it before we left, because they sell bottles of their premier drams and they're in limited run because they only have so many barrels of it. So bought this premier dram of rye from the Jack Rose DC single barrel, and it's sitting on a shelf. It's on one of my display shelves in the home that I have. Then I don't know if I'll ever open that bad boy up. I might just have to go back to Jack Rose Dining Saloon when I'm in DC, because I go up there frequent enough to actually be able to go back there in a relatively frequent manner. And definitely going to have more of that rye, because that was knock it out of the park dynamite. Now, fast forward. The Rohan duck duo comes out and is set before my wife. The American Wagyu Culotte steak is set in front of me. And you say, Culotte? What is a culotte? Because it sounds like it's a French word. Well, come to find out it is a French word. And it's a way in which they prepare a sirloin steak. It's a specific cut and preparation to a sirloin steak. Now, what does that culotte mean? I don't know all the specifics because I'm not a cooking show and I'm not a chef, but I will tell you this much. Whatever they did to that culotte steak, that American Wagyu culotte steak, it cut and ate like I was eating a filet mignon, which blew my mind. So you had the juicy, greasy, absolutely brilliant flavorfulness of a Wagyu steak in there, but the tenderness of almost being a filet mignon. So On top of that, that came with pan-roasted lemon garlic Brussels sprouts, and when I ate the Brussels sprouts alongside of it, they didn't taste like Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts were just the vehicle in which they were delivering the flavor. I mean, it was insanely good. And they're crisp and they're tasty, and it also comes with a chimichurri sauce. Now, myself personally, as you get to know me more on the channel, you'll find out anytime I mention the word steak, you're not gonna hear any type of sauce going on my steak because I want the meat to speak for itself. I want it to be quality meat. I want it to be a good steak, well cooked, well prepared, and when I bite into it, the time I spend with that steak, having to chew it, feel the juices and flavors on my tongue and digest it, that's gonna be where I really get into, was this a good steak or not? And I can tell you right now, the American Wagyu Culotte steak at Jack Rose Dining Saloon was knock it out of the park, dynamite, phenomenal. Their chefs in the back are absolutely killing it back there. Now, that was the other cool part, is that so while we were there was a gal going around. She was in one of those pioneer dresses, and really, really nice gal, and she was actually filling up people's water as she was out at there, and she was stopping and talking to folks, and then as I got to talk to her, come to find out, she's one of the chefs, and in the most brilliant way, it is a husband and wife team who are absolutely attacking this menu and creating a beast of a menu that is full of flavor with some Southern comfort thrown in there to go right alongside the drams upon drams upon drams of whiskey that you can partake while you are there. Now, here's the crazy part. So I asked my server, as we were eating the Wagyu, he stopped by again, of course, in the Rohan duck duo, which the Rohan duck is a Rohan duck breast with a confit duck leg, which just means that they trim back some of it so you can see the bone and all that stuff. So you have your confit duck bag with a creamy spatzel and a baby bok choy with a duck jus. And my wife, if she's eating this duck, she goes, "Oh my God, you've got to try the duck." And I'm like, "I'm eating my steak, and I'm not trying a duck. I'm eating my steak." And she goes, "No, baby, you've got to try the duck. It is insanely good." And so as I'm chewing and eating this duck, my mind was blown because not only is it, again, brilliantly prepared by the chef and his team, because the wife is out there, so clearly she's not the chef behind the kitchen tonight, but her husband is. And so the chef behind the scenes that you don't see because they're back behind in the kitchen, but absolutely slayed it because this duck ate like it was a steak. I've never had a duck this tasty, this flavorful, and a duck breast and a duck leg that ate like it was a piece of steak. It was amazing. It had just enough chewiness. The fat wasn't chewy. It broke down and was rendered perfectly, but it was crispy on the outside of the skin, and it just was this flavorful, meaty, juicy with the duck fat and crispy with the skin. I hate to say it, the Rohan duck duo was, dare I say it, perfection. It was brilliantly executed, not what I was anticipating from duck, and it was duck as in a phenomenal ingredient prepared by excellent chefs who are given excellent, phenomenal ingredients, and they prepared a masterful and brilliant dish. And I would recommend every day and twice on Sunday that you get the American Wagyu Culotte steak and the Rohan duck duo at a Jack Rose Dining Saloon, because it was absolutely brilliant. So now we go back to just being in the moment, being in Jack Rose Dining Saloon. Here we are, we've got good drams, good food, having a wonderful conversation with my wife, and we're just soaking it in and eating this wonderful food, drinking these great drams of whiskey. She's having herself a wonderful spritzer that she had found on the menu that she really liked, a mixed drink that she really liked. I think it's like a Dr. Feelgood or something like that, or just what the doctor ordered or something. And as we're finishing up, I'm talking to Brian, and I'm like, all right, so clearly it can get crazy if you go in there. So is it worth your time? Is it worth your effort? That's not only a yes, it's a hell yes. If you love whiskey, if you love a good bourbon, if you love whiskey, any kind of whiskey, whether it's an EY or a Y, whether it's Japanese whiskey, Scotch, Irish whiskeys from India, Spain. I mean, they've got the globe covered on top of that. If you love a good whiskey, then you're gonna love going to Jack Rose Dining Saloon because you are in your element as a fan of whiskeys, and you can go as simple or as crazy as you want to get. And you're like, I said, so man, okay, so if I wanted to pour something, how crazy could I get? And he goes, well, you could easily get over $1,000. And I said, okay, if I said, bring me your most expensive pour, and he laughed and he goes, you would definitely want to cry if I brought that to you. And I said, why? And he goes, because that's over $5,000. And I said, huh. I said, how do you have a $5,000 1-ounce pour? And he goes, because the bottle predates Prohibition. It's an American whiskey that was saved through Prohibition that Bill Thomas, the owner, put in his private collection, which rumor has it that it's up and over 6,000 different bottles of whiskey in his private collection. And he has rotated it from getting it from an auction, he has rotated it into the actual bottle stock that's in that 2,700 bottle stock of Jack Rose Dining Saloon's 2,700 plus whiskeys. So what does that mean? That means that you can get as crazy as you want to get. You can get a 1-ounce pour of a pre-Prohibition whiskey you can go out and you can get yourself a signature old fashioned with some Wild Turkey 101 rye, some maybe just a nice dram of Buffalo Trace. You can go out and get yourself some Pappy Van Winkle if the spirit so takes you. You can also go out there and find pretty much whatever you are potentially looking for in the whiskey world to partake of, and wet your whistle there at Jack Rose Dining Saloon in Washington, D.C. So I would say that if you are anywhere in the world at this point, not just the United States, but anywhere in the world, and you get a chance to go to Washington, D.C., make sure you make a beeline as a whiskey lover to Jack Rose Dining Saloon. Call ahead, set a reservation. Let them know you heard it here, if that's the case. Eat, stay, life. That said, I would highly, highly recommend that you go to Jack Rose Dining Saloon. Highly recommend as a whiskey lover. And I'd say go there every day of the week and twice on Sunday if the wife would let me. And you can get as crazy as you want with the budget, or you can stay as however you want to do that. Just know that you're going to get your dollar's worth every single time you go there. Again, so with that said, I'd like to say thanks for listening. Remember to follow us on. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you like what you heard here, you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Eat Stay Life. That's all one word, Eat Stay Life. And on X.com, you can do at Eat Stay Life, and also over on Rumble. Again, this is Seth with Eat Stay Life, and just say it's a pleasure doing life with you. Till next time.